The rhythmic swoosh of the mop against the polished marble echoed through the deserted hallway. Sarah Martinez, her name tag slightly askew, pushed the cleaning cart with a practiced ease, her gaze fixed on the hypnotic gleam of the freshly waxed floor. Just another Tuesday night, she thought, the familiar sting of irony twisting in her gut. A Tuesday night spent mopping the floors of Sterling Financial Group, 42 floors above a city that barely knew she existed, let alone that she held a mathematics degree from one of the most prestigious universities in the country. The silence of the executive floor, normally a sanctuary of hushed power, tonight thrummed with a low-frequency hum of anxiety. It clung to the air like the lingering scent of expensive cologne, sharp and unsettling. She'd noticed it the last few nights, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tightening in the shoulders of the executives who worked late, their hushed phone calls bleeding desperation into the usually sterile air. Tonight, the tension was almost palpable. Discarded spreadsheets lay crumpled in wastebaskets, their intricate grids of numbers a stark testament to something gone terribly wrong. Sarah paused, her hand hovering over a particularly crumpled sheet. The numbers, even in their disarray, whispered to her. Derivatives, complex financial instruments, something about the volatility index. She caught snippets of frantic conversations as she passed closed office doors. Liquidity crisis, billion-dollar exposure, market correction. The fragments swirled in her mind, forming a disjointed, unsettling puzzle. Sterling Financial, the unshakable giant, was teetering. A wave of something akin to guilt washed over her. She'd deliberately chosen this life, this invisibility. After graduation, the crushing weight of student loans and the desperate need to support her family had forced her to shelve her dreams of pursuing a career in mathematical finance. The world of high finance, with its gleaming towers and cutthroat ambition, had seemed too daunting, too far removed from the realities of her life. She'd convinced herself that this, the anonymity of the night shift, the predictable routine of cleaning, was a refuge, a way to avoid the pressures and disappointments of a world she wasn't sure she belonged in. But tonight, the familiar comfort of her routine felt like a betrayal, a willful ignorance of a problem she knew she could understand, perhaps even solve. She found herself outside the boardroom, its massive oak doors slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. The muffled voices inside escalated, laced with a rising panic. Curiosity, that dangerous, forbidden spark, ignited within her. It was a risk, she knew, a breach of the invisible wall that separated her world from theirs. But the numbers, the whispers of impending disaster, pulled her in like a moth to a flame. She pushed the door open a fraction wider, her heart pounding against her ribs. Victoria Sterling, the CEO, a woman whose image graced the covers of financial magazines, paced the length of the mahogany table, her face etched with a desperate fatigue Sarah had never seen before. Robert Mitchell, the CFO, usually the picture of unflappable composure, sat slumped in his chair, his tie loosened, his eyes fixed on a complex equation projected onto the wall. Jennifer Walsh, the head of legal, stood by the window, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice a low murmur of legalese. The equation on the wall, a monstrous string of Greek symbols and financial jargon, held Sarah's attention. It was a valuation model, she realized, used to assess the risk of a complex investment strategy. And it was wrong. Fundamentally, irrevocably wrong. A single, critical error in the volatility calculation, a misplaced decimal point, rippled through the entire model, magnifying the risk exponentially. Her mind raced, calculating the potential impact. 1.2 billion, that was the potential loss, a number so staggering it made her breath catch in her throat. She knew she should walk away, retreat back into the shadows, back to the safety of her anonymity. But the numbers, their insistent whisper, wouldn't let her. It was more than just a mathematical error. It was a looming catastrophe, a disaster she knew she could avert. The conflict raged within her, the ingrained habits of a lifetime battling against the undeniable urge to act. What right did she have, a mere janitor, to interfere in the affairs of these titans of finance. Yet, the potential consequences, the human cost of such a massive financial loss, weighed heavily on her. Jobs lost, families ruined, the abstract numbers translated into real-world suffering, a suffering she couldn't ignore. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the sound startling the occupants of the room. Victoria Sterling stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing, a mixture of irritation and exhaustion in her gaze. "Who?" she began, her voice sharp, then trailed off as she took in Sarah's uniform, the mop and bucket by her side. The stale, recirculated air hung heavy in the hallway, clinging to Sarah like a second skin. Fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, their pale glow reflecting off the polished marble floors. The rhythmic swoosh of her mop against the tiles had, for the past 3 hours, been the only sound to break the silence. Now, however, a different kind of sound vibrated through the walls, a low thrum of anxious energy emanating from the executive boardroom. Voices, sharp and strained, rose and fell in a dissonant chorus. She recognized Victoria Sterling's crisp, commanding tone, usually laced with steely confidence, now frayed at the edges with something that sounded suspiciously like panic. Sarah paused, her hand still gripping the mop handle. Her reflection stared back at her from the gleaming mahogany door, a ghost in a faded blue uniform. The whispers leaking from the boardroom intensified. Words like liability, losses, and billion pierced the quiet, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile illusion of stability. A billion. The number echoed in her mind, vast and incomprehensible. She imagined a mountain of money, towering and precarious, on the verge of collapse. It was a world away from the crumpled bills she counted meticulously each week, stretching them to cover rent and groceries. A wave of dizziness washed over her. This was none of her business. She was a cleaner, invisible in the grand scheme of Sterling Financial. Her job was to erase the traces of the day, not to delve into the anxieties that fueled it. Better to finish her route and go home to the quiet hum of her daughter's nightlight. She took a step back, the mop squeaking softly against the floor, a small, pathetic protest against the gravitational pull of the unfolding drama. But the numbers, they clung to her thoughts like static. $1 billion loss. The sheer scale of it was unsettling, a dissonant chord in the careful calculations that constantly whirred beneath the surface of her mind. Even without knowing the specifics, her mathematical intuition, a finely tuned instrument honed by years of solitary practice, whispered that something was profoundly wrong. She felt a strange compulsion, a pull towards the source of the disturbance, like a moth drawn to a flickering flame. It was more than just curiosity, it was a deep-seated need to understand, to dissect, to solve. This wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about people's lives, their livelihoods, their futures hanging in the balance. The image of her daughter's sleeping face flashed in her mind. Her daughter, who deserved more than a hand-to-mouth existence, more than the worn-out shoes and the patched-up clothes. This could be a chance. A ridiculous, improbable chance. But a chance nonetheless. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of anxiety. What if she was wrong? What if she overstepped? The fear of humiliation warred with the gnawing unease of knowing something was amiss. She imagined Victoria Sterling's icy gaze, the condescending sneer of Robert Mitchell, the CFO, who always seemed to look straight through her. But another voice, quieter yet more persistent, whispered in the back of her mind. It spoke of equations and algorithms, of patterns and probabilities, of the elegant logic of numbers that held the universe together. It was the voice of her true self, the mathematician hidden beneath layers of self-doubt and societal expectations. She took a deep breath, the stale air filling her lungs with a strange sense of resolve. The mop handle felt solid in her grip, an unexpected source of comfort. It was just a cleaning tool, but in this moment, it felt like a shield, a symbol of her right to be here. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, Sarah turned back towards the imposing mahogany door. Her reflection, no longer a ghost, but a woman with a purpose etched on her face, met her gaze. The voices inside grew louder, punctuated by the sharp tap of a pen against a table, the rustle of papers, the heavy sighs of defeat. Sarah raised her hand and knocked softly, the sound swallowed by the cacophony within. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then knocked again, this time a little firmer. The noise abruptly ceased. A moment of stunned silence hung in the air before the door swung open, revealing Jennifer Walsh, the head of legal, her face pale and drawn. "Yes?" Jennifer asked, her voice tight with barely suppressed anxiety. Sarah met her gaze, her own surprisingly steady. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm and clear, the words carefully rehearsed in her mind. "Just need to empty the trash and clean the boards." Behind Jennifer, she caught a glimpse of Victoria Sterling, her face etched with worry, and Robert Mitchell, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The air in the room crackled with tension, a palpable sense of impending doom. Sarah stepped inside, the mop handle clicking softly against the doorframe, the sound echoing in the sudden silence like the click of a lock falling into place. The boardroom, a symbol of power and wealth, now felt like a cage, trapping its occupants in a nightmare of their own making. And Sarah, the invisible cleaner, had just walked into the heart of it. The stale air hung heavy in the Sterling Financial boardroom, a stark contrast to the vibrant city lights twinkling beyond the panoramic windows. Sarah Martinez, usually invisible in her janitor's uniform, felt an unsettling current in the room's normally placid atmosphere. The low hum of the cleaning cart's motor seemed to amplify the silence, a silence punctuated by the sharp intakes of breath and the rustle of papers. Victoria Sterling, CEO, and the woman whose portrait in the lobby exuded an almost mythical power, paced the length of the mahogany table like a caged panther. Her crisp white suit, usually immaculate, was creased, her iron composure replaced with a visible tremor in her hand as she gripped a crystal glass of water. Sarah's practiced movements, the methodical wiping down of the whiteboard, provided a strange sense of detachment. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Her shift should have ended an hour ago, but Mr. Henderson, the night supervisor, had asked her to do a special clean of the boardroom. Another executive meltdown. She thought, the familiar tang of desperation clinging to the air like cheap perfume. She had witnessed these scenes before, the hushed anxieties, the frantic calculations scribbled on the whiteboard, erased and rewritten with increasing frenzy. Usually, she remained unnoticed, a shadow in the periphery. Tonight, though, the silence was different, heavier. Victoria's voice, normally a commanding instrument, was brittle. "We're hemorrhaging money, Robert. We need a solution, and we need it now." Robert Mitchell, the CFO, sat slumped in his chair, his face a mask of exhaustion. The impeccably tailored suit hung loose on his frame, his tie askew, a stark contrast to his usually meticulous appearance. He ran a hand over his thinning hair, a gesture of utter defeat. Sarah, while ostensibly focused on cleaning the whiteboard's lower edge, found her gaze drawn to the complex equations scrawled across its surface. Numbers, for Sarah, were more than just symbols. They were a language, a story whispered in a code she understood intrinsically. Jennifer Walsh, head of legal, a woman whose sharp intellect was usually masked by a veneer of polite formality, spoke with a tremor in her voice. "What about bankruptcy protection, Victoria? Can we buy ourselves some time?" Sarah's heart clenched. Bankruptcy. The word resonated with a deep, personal fear. She'd seen what it did to families, the ripple effect of financial devastation. Her own family had teetered on that precipice before, a memory that still sent a chill down her spine. Robert Mitchell's voice, hoarse with fatigue, broke the tense silence. "Unless we can reduce our liability by at least $800 million, we're done. The banks won't touch us." His words hung in the air, each syllable heavy with impending doom. Sarah's gaze swept across the figures on the whiteboard again, drawn by an almost magnetic force. The Meridian deal. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes, rearranging themselves in her mind. Something wasn't right. The hum of the industrial vacuum cleaner usually faded into the background noise of Sarah's thoughts, a dull counterpoint to the complex equations that danced in her mind. Tonight, however, the hum felt like an insistent drumbeat against the rising tide of anxiety in her chest. The pristine whiteboard, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the Sterling Financial Group executive boardroom, held a series of figures that made her stomach clench. Numbers, usually her refuge, her solace, now seemed like menacing symbols of a disaster waiting to happen. She had seen a misplaced decimal point, a seemingly insignificant error, but one with the potential to unravel the entire intricate tapestry of Sterling's latest acquisition. A $1.2 billion mistake. Sarah switched off the vacuum, the sudden silence amplifying the hammering in her ears. The boardroom, a space of hushed power during the day, now felt heavy with the weight of the impending catastrophe. She ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of the mahogany table, the expensive with a stark contrast to the worn fabric of her cleaning uniform. This wasn't her place, not really. She was a ghost in this world of high finance, a silent observer, not a participant. Yet, the numbers, they spoke to her, a language she understood with an intimacy that transcended the barriers of her social standing. She glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. Everyone had long gone, leaving behind the remnants of their day. Half-empty coffee cups, scattered papers, the lingering scent of expensive cologne. This was her domain, the time when she could shed the invisibility cloak of her job and indulge in her true passion, deciphering the intricate dance of numbers. She'd spent countless nights like this, studying the financial reports left behind, reconstructing the complex calculations in her head, finding a strange solace in the order and logic of it all. But tonight, the order was broken. "Excuse me, but I think there might be an error in your calculations." The words felt strange in her mouth, a foreign language she hadn't spoken in years. The echo in the empty room startled her. She was talking to no one, and yet she felt a tremor of fear, a premonition of the disruption she was about to cause. She told herself it was foolish. It was just a number, a decimal point. Yet, the potential consequences loomed large, casting a long shadow over her courage. She picked up a dry erase marker, its plastic casing cold against her skin. Her hand hovered over the board, the red ink poised like a loaded weapon. What was she doing? This was reckless, presumptuous. Who was she, a janitor, to question the work of highly paid financial analysts? The weight of her insignificance pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate the small voice of reason that urged her forward. But the numbers, they wouldn't let her rest. They pulsed with a silent urgency, a plea for correction. She closed her eyes, picturing the cascading consequences of the error, the financial ruin, the lost jobs. The image solidified her resolve. This wasn't about her. It was about the numbers, about the truth. She opened her eyes and, with a shaky hand, circled the offending figure. Line 7, third column. The decimal point is in the wrong place. It should be 400 million, not 4 billion. The words hung in the air, a stark challenge to the silent authority of the boardroom. She stepped back, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. The marker slipped from her numb fingers and clattered against the polished floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. The first ones to arrive were Victoria Sterling, the CEO, and Robert Mitchell, the CFO. Their faces were etched with exhaustion and worry, the weight of the impending crisis evident in their slumped shoulders and tense expressions. They looked at her, the janitor, standing amidst their carefully crafted world of power and prestige, with a mixture of surprise and irritation. Victoria's voice was sharp, edged with the brittle tension of sleepless nights. "What is the meaning of this, MS?" "Martinez," Sarah replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Sarah Martinez. I just wanted to point out something I noticed." Robert Mitchell, his face pale and drawn, scoffed. "And what exactly did you notice, Ms. Martinez?" "I assure you, Our financial analysts are more than qualified to handle these calculations. Sarah swallowed hard, her throat dry. She pointed to the circled figure on the board. The decimal point, it's in the wrong place. It throws off the entire valuation. It's a $1.2 billion discrepancy. A stunned silence filled the room. Victoria Sterling, her eyes like chips of ice, stared at the board, her expression unreadable. Robert Mitchell let out a choked laugh, a sound devoid of humor. A billion-dollar mistake? That's absurd. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the circled figure. The blood drained from his face as the realization dawned. His laugh died in his throat, replaced by a strangled gasp. Jennifer Walsh, the head of legal, arrived next, her face a mask of grim determination. She took in the scene the CEO, the CFO, and the janitor standing before the whiteboard with a flicker of confusion. "What's going on?" Victoria's voice, when she spoke, was devoid of its usual steel. "Ms. Martinez here seems to believe we've made a rather significant error in our calculations." Jennifer, a lawyer known for her meticulous attention to detail, stepped forward and examined the board. Her initial skepticism gradually morphed into disbelief, and then, finally, into dawning horror. The room felt like it was holding its breath, the silence punctuated only by the frantic ticking of the clock on the wall. Robert, his voice trembling, began to recalculate, his fingers flying over the keys of his calculator. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension in the room. Finally, he looked up, his face ashen. "She's right," he whispered, the words barely audible. "The decimal point, it's a $1.2 billion mistake." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken implications. The averted gazes, the slumped shoulders, the barely suppressed panic, it was the silent acknowledgement of the disaster they had narrowly avoided. Victoria Sterling, her composure regained, turned to Sarah. Her eyes, though still sharp, now held a flicker of something akin to respect. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her voice steady, "you've just saved this company." The stale air hung heavy in the Sterling financial boardroom, a mixture of expensive coffee and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a stark glow on the polished mahogany table where Victoria Sterling sat, her posture rigid, a storm brewing behind her ice-blue eyes. Across from her, Sarah Martinez stood, still clutching the now infamous marker, her knuckles white, a tremor running through her. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the faint, rhythmic whirring of the cleaning cart parked just outside the closed doors. "What's your name?" Victoria's voice was clipped, each word a precisely cut diamond of ice. Sarah swallowed, the dryness in her throat making it a struggle. This woman, this empire builder, held Sarah's life in her hands. "Just answer the question. Simple. Say your name." Her internal monologue was a frantic whisper against the roaring in her ears. "Sarah Martinez," she managed, the words barely audible above the humming lights. Victoria's gaze, sharp and assessing, swept over Sarah, taking in her simple, worn clothes, the faint smudges of cleaning fluid on her hands. A dismissive flicker crossed her face. "She thinks I'm nothing. Just a cleaning lady." The thought stung, a sharp prickle of resentment against the years of being invisible, of her potential lying dormant, buried beneath layers of necessity and self-doubt. "And your qualifications?" The word hung in the air, laced with skepticism. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to meet Victoria's gaze. "This is it, the moment of truth. I have a degree in applied mathematics from Brooklyn College. Graduated summa cum laude, class of 2017. The words, once hesitant, now held a newfound strength, a quiet defiance. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked, crossed Victoria's face. The silence returned, heavier this time, pregnant with unspoken questions. Victoria's gaze dropped to the corrected equation on the whiteboard, then back to Sarah. A complex array of emotions flickered across her features: disbelief, suspicion, a grudging admiration. Sarah could almost hear the gears turning in Victoria's mind, reassessing, recalibrating. The air crackled with the unspoken question hanging between them. How could someone with this kind of intellect be cleaning her boardroom? "You've been working in my building for 3 years," Victoria finally said, her voice laced with a mixture of incredulity and something akin to awe. "And nobody thought to mention that our cleaning staff includes a mathematician." The statement wasn't a question, but a bewildered observation, a reflection of the absurd reality unfolding before her. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs. 3 years. 3 years of scrubbing floors, emptying trash cans, her mind a whirlwind of equations and algorithms while her hands performed mundane tasks. 3 years of feeling like a caged bird, her wings beating against the bars of circumstance. They didn't see me. They looked right through me. The thought resonated, a dull ache in her chest. The corner of Victoria's mouth twitched, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. It was a fleeting expression, gone as quickly as it appeared, but it was enough to loosen the knot of tension in Sarah's stomach. A faint hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, began to flutter within her. Victoria rose from her chair, her movements fluid and graceful, a stark contrast to Sarah's nervous stillness. She walked to the window, gazing out at the pre-dawn cityscape, a tapestry of lights twinkling against the inky blackness. Sarah watched her, her mind racing, trying to decipher the thoughts hidden behind that impassive mask. Victoria turned back, her eyes now holding a glint of something that looked remarkably like respect. "Senior financial analyst," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, reporting directly to Robert Mitchell. "Starting salary $120,000, full benefits. Immediate start." The words hung in the air, shimmering with the promise of a different life. Sarah stared at her, speechless, the sudden shift in her reality leaving her momentarily breathless. 120,000? A real job? Respect? The thoughts tumbled through her mind, a chaotic jumble of disbelief and elation. The weight of years of struggle seemed to lift, replaced by a lightness she hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime. The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly seemed less oppressive, the stale air less suffocating. The world outside the boardroom window, once a distant, unattainable landscape, now seemed within reach. A slow smile spread across Sarah's face, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, reflecting the dawn breaking not just outside the window, but within her own soul. The cleaning cart in the hallway, a symbol of her past, now seemed a world away. She was no longer invisible. She had been seen. The opulent boardroom, usually echoing with the hushed tones of power, now held a different kind of silence. A silence pregnant with the aftermath of a near disaster. A silence thick with the realization of how close they had come to the abyss. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial, stood by the panoramic window, the city lights a glittering tapestry against the darkening sky. Her reflection, a silhouette etched against the cityscape, mirrored her inner turmoil. Just hours ago, this very room had been a battleground of fear and desperation. Now, a strange sense of calm pervaded, a calm born not of resolution, but of revelation. She turned, her gaze settling on a young woman who sat quietly at the mahogany table, a single lamp illuminating her face. Sarah Martinez, a name that until a few hours ago meant nothing, a face that blended with the anonymity of the night shift. Now this woman, this janitor, held the key to their survival. Victoria studied her, the quiet dignity in her posture, the intelligence flickering in her eyes, a stark contrast to the worn fabric of her uniform. It was a dissonance that struck a chord within Victoria, a jarring reminder of how easily brilliance could be overlooked, how easily talent could be masked by circumstance. "I want you to tell your story, Sarah," Victoria said, her voice softer than the steel usually reserved for boardroom pronouncements. She moved towards the table, her steps measured, each one a conscious effort to bridge the chasm between them. "I want everyone to understand that talent can come from anywhere." Sarah looked up, her eyes meeting Victoria's. A flicker of surprise, a hint of apprehension, then a quiet resolve settled in her gaze. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the sudden shift in her reality. Just a few hours ago, she was invisible, a ghost moving through the sterile hallways of power. Now, she was here at the epicenter, her presence acknowledged, her voice requested. A wave of dizziness washed over her, the weight of her transformation almost unbearable. She swallowed, the dryness in her throat a testament to her unease. "My story," she echoed, the words a mere breath against the heavy silence. "Yes," Victoria affirmed, pulling a chair closer, her movements deliberate, almost maternal. "Your journey. How you saw what we all missed. How you saved us." Sarah's mind raced. The years of quiet desperation, the nights spent poring over textbooks after grueling shifts, the constant struggle to balance her passion for mathematics with the harsh realities of providing for her family. The sacrifices, the doubts, the suppressed dreams, a torrent of memories threatened to overwhelm her. Could she truly articulate the labyrinthine path that had led her to this moment? Could she expose the vulnerability that lay beneath the surface of her newfound confidence? It wasn't anything special," she began, her voice barely a whisper, the ingrained humility difficult to shed. I saw a pattern." Her gaze fell upon the papers spread across the table, the corrected calculations, the tangible proof of her extraordinary ability. It felt surreal, a dream woven from the fabric of her deepest desires. Victoria listened intently, her expression unreadable, yet her silence was not dismissive. It was the silence of genuine curiosity, of a mind actively processing, of a perspective shifting. Robert Mitchell, the CFO, and Jennifer Walsh, head of legal, remained seated, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and newfound respect. The atmosphere had shifted from the tense urgency of crisis to a quiet contemplation, a shared recognition of the extraordinary turn of events. A thought, sharp and unsettling, pierced through Sarah's apprehension. "What if there are others?" she asked, the question hanging in the air, heavy with implication. "Others like me?" Victoria's gaze sharpened, a flicker of understanding igniting in her eyes. "Then we're going to find them," she stated, her voice ringing with a newfound conviction. "Genius doesn't always wear a suit." The words resonated within Sarah, a ripple of hope spreading through her. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the countless others hidden in plain sight, their potential untapped, their brilliance waiting to be discovered. A profound sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, began to bloom within her, replacing the years of isolation and self-doubt. The wheels began to turn in Victoria's mind, a new strategy forming, a new philosophy taking root. She envisioned a company-wide talent search, a program designed to identify and nurture the hidden gems within Sterling Financial, a system that valued potential over pedigree. The cost of implementing such a program was insignificant compared to the potential rewards. The near catastrophe had illuminated a critical flaw in their existing structure, a blind spot that had nearly cost them everything. Sarah's discovery was not just a solution to a single crisis. It was a catalyst for a fundamental shift in their corporate culture. As the meeting drew to a close, Sarah felt a profound shift within herself. The fear and uncertainty that had clung to her like a second skin began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet confidence, a sense of self-worth that had been dormant for far too long. She was no longer just a janitor. She was Sarah Martinez, financial analyst, a woman whose intellect had saved the company, a woman whose story was just beginning. The fluorescent lights of the hallway seemed brighter now, the familiar scent of disinfectant no longer a reminder of her menial tasks, but a testament to her journey. The weight of her past, the years of silent struggle, now felt like a foundation, a solid base upon which she could build her future. The city lights, viewed from the towering windows of Sterling Financial, no longer seemed like a distant, unattainable dream. They were a reflection of her own potential, A reminder that even in the vast expanse of the urban landscape, a single spark could ignite a revolution. And she, Sarah Martinez, was that spark. The hum of the city 6 floors below was a muted drone, a stark contrast to the silence of her own office. 6 months. 6 months since the fluorescent lights of the boardroom had reflected off the cold, hard numbers that had changed her life. 6 months since the tremor of fear, the chilling certainty of disaster, had given way to the slow, hesitant bloom of hope. Sarah leaned back in her leather chair, the smooth, cool surface of foreign luxury against her skin. She still wasn't quite used to it, this office, this life. Sometimes, late at night, the scent of industrial cleaner would ghost through her memory, a phantom limb of her former existence. She would close her eyes, almost able to feel the rough texture of the cleaning cloths, the sting of disinfectant in her nostrils. But then she would open them, her gaze falling on the framed degrees adorning her wall: mathematics, economics, finally vindicated after years of being tucked away, gathering dust in the attic of her life. A soft knock broke the silence. Victoria Sterling. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nerves, a residue of the awe she still felt in the presence of the CEO. Though Victoria had made a conscious effort to bridge the gap, to treat Sarah not as a former janitor, but as a valued colleague, the echoes of the past still lingered. "Come in," Sarah said, her voice steadier than her heart. Victoria entered, her usual sharp, decisive movements softened by a genuine smile. "Sarah, how are you settling in?" The question was simple, polite, but Sarah detected a deeper layer of concern, a genuine interest that went beyond mere professional courtesy. "Very well, thank you," Sarah replied, pushing down the urge to fidget. She had learned to navigate these interactions, to project an image of confidence that sometimes felt like a costume she was still learning to wear. Inside, a whirlwind of thoughts swirled: imposter syndrome, a lingering disbelief that all this was real, a constant fear that it could all be snatched away in an instant. "I wanted to check in, see how the new derivatives model is coming along." Victoria's gaze was sharp, intelligent, taking in not only Sarah's words, but also the subtle shifts in her expression. "Robert tells me it's revolutionary." A small, genuine smile touched Sarah's lips. The model, her model, built from the scraps of knowledge she'd hoarded, nurtured in the quiet hours after her cleaning shifts, fueled by a passion that had refused to be extinguished. "It's progressing well. We're on track to finalize it by next quarter." She still felt a thrill of pride, a sense of vindication every time she spoke about her work. "Excellent," Victoria said, her voice laced with satisfaction. "You know, Sarah," she continued, moving to the window overlooking the city, "when I launched the Hidden Talent Initiative, I truly hoped, to uncover potential within Sterling. But I never imagined," she paused, turning back to meet Sarah's gaze. "I never imagined we'd find a gem like you." Sarah's breath hitched. A gem. The word echoed in the quiet office, a stark contrast to the label she had worn for so long: invisible, insignificant, the cleaning lady. She lowered her gaze, momentarily overwhelmed. "This company," Victoria continued, her voice filled with a conviction that resonated deep within Sarah, "was built on taking risks, on seeing value where others don't. And you, Sarah, you are the embodiment of that spirit." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Sarah looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze, finally allowing herself to absorb the weight of her words. The lingering self-doubt, the fear of being exposed as a fraud, began to recede, replaced by a burgeoning sense of belonging, of finally being seen. "The transformation has been remarkable," Sarah finally said, her voice soft but steady. "Not just for her, but for the entire company. The Hidden Talents Initiative had unearthed a wealth of untapped potential, breathing new life into Sterling Financial. The atmosphere had shifted from one of stagnant hierarchy to vibrant collaboration. People were engaged, energized, driven by a renewed sense of purpose." Victoria nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Indeed. One incredible journey, right?" The words hung in the air, a simple statement, yet laden with meaning. An incredible journey, from the shadowed corners of the boardroom to the sunlit expanse of her own office. From the sting of invisibility to the warmth of recognition. Sarah looked out at the sprawling cityscape. The once daunting towers, now symbols of possibility, of a future she was finally allowed to claim. The journey had been arduous, fraught with uncertainty, but in that moment, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, Sarah knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it had all been worth it. The scent of cleaning fluid was gone, replaced by the subtle aroma of leather and ambition. The weight of the past had lifted, leaving behind the exhilarating lightness of possibility. And as she met Victoria's gaze, a silent promise passed between them, a shared understanding of the transformative power of recognizing the hidden gems, the quiet brilliance that often lies dormant, waiting to be unearthed.